Imagine this, a gaming company putting New Zealand on the map.
We kind of had a vibe that we could tell it was going to be a good thing.
Could gaming become our next billion-dollar industry?
I didn't realise quite how anxious I was about failing, that I wasn't actually a capable game developer.
Kia ora and welcome to Imagine This, a podcast about creative people here in Wellington who are doing awesome things in business. My guests today are Robert and Peter Curry. They are the co-founders of Dinosaur Polo Club. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Tell me about your love of gaming. Was it part of your lives when you were growing up?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, as soon as our folks got us a computer, when we were
13?
starting... Intermediate, I think. Yeah, they saw it as a educational tool, which they were probably quite accurate with, but we just started playing games on it almost immediately.
Yeah, it was things like Wolfenstein and Command and Keen, and then going to like Doom and Command and Conquer and things like that. It was,
okay, I've never heard of any of these, but that's all right. So did you at that point at all think about a future career in gaming, or was it just a hobby like it is for most
So we got
teenagers?
into tabletop gaming as well from about the age of 14, 15. So like Warhammer and things like that. And that was where we were actually focused on for a long time, was doing our own sort of tabletop games. I don't remember when we started getting into actually making our own digital games.
The only careers I've ever envisaged for myself, can remember envisaging as a child, was either in tabletop wargaming or computer games.
Really?
Yeah.
How come?
Because I wanted to make games.
And you thought that was a viable career as a teenager?
I think I was trying to delay actual adult decisions, to be honest. In fact, it wasn't until university I went to Vic and got a comp sci degree with the intention, I guess that's what, because there weren't any games degrees back then, so I figured that was the closest I could get. And I wasn't really thinking too seriously about what I would do when I graduated. And it was only when there was an ad, when a local game development company here was putting out an ad for testers at the end of my third year. And I was like, oh, there are game companies in New Zealand? I had no idea.
And so did you get in touch with them?
Yes, I applied there and then didn't ever hear back. But then someone else in the game development club at Victoria said, there's this company in town that are looking like they would hire you guys in a heartbeat, because we were actually doing, we were mucking around doing our own game dev stuff. And then I emailed them and then, got an interview and got a job straight out of school there as a programmer.
And what was it like in the industry here back then?
I think Gene Interactive, they were real pioneers. They were pretty much beginning from scratch. So it was a really there was a real sense of just all of us in it together, having to learn how all this was going to, like how you did this,
because we were making games on the original Xbox and the PlayStation 2, and we didn't know what we were doing. It was quite. I'm still amazed that we managed to pull it all together and get these games out.
So when you started, I imagine that the industry was dominated by these big players that you needed distribution channels to be able to actually get your games out. Has the progress of the internet meant that it's much cheaper and easier to actually get your games directly to your audience without having to go through those other parties? Yeah,
for sure. That's been the one big, huge shift that we can point to that really has enabled us to be in the jobs that we're in right now. Because, and I think we have first-hand experience of this, because we left our the company that we started with in 2006 to do our own thing, and this was before the iPhone, before the App Store, before all that stuff. And there were very small avenues for digital distribution. There were people who were where you could buy games straight off their website, and that was about the extent of it. And we had these grand ideas to follow in that model.
But I think there were maybe 6 people we could point to all around the world who had actually done this
Really? Done what?
Who just had managed to be a small independent game producer who was earning enough to actually survive. Because, as Pete said, it was pretty much only buying it off people's website. That was pretty much it. There were some online portals, but it was very small.
So you left your jobs to create your own studio. This was when you were about 25 years old, right?
Yeah.
Wandering Monster Studio. Tell me about this, your first business endeavour.
Yeah, so we were, it was us and this other guy, Lloyd, who we worked with. We were always working on games in our spare time, even
when you had a full-time job.
I mean, even when it was over a full-time job, even when we were doing overtime, we would come home. It was like the more overtime we would do, the more we wanted to then come home, work on our own thing.
Were you living together at the time?
Yeah, we were. Yeah,
okay, and we should mention that you're twins as well, so you've got a special connection.
Yeah. Yeah, and so we were working on a game in our spare time, and it was a completely, it was completely overscoped, thing that we couldn't ever actually hope to do. But we were young, and we thought we could do anything.
We thought we were invincible.
Oh, completely. We thought everything we were going to do was just going to work out. So we stuck. We were there for a year and a half. We continued doing that. We did produce some interesting tech, and we did do some cool stuff. But it was very, very.
It wasn't anything.
It was a long way to actually having a complete game.
Yeah, you couldn't convince anyone that it was a game.
So you didn't actually finish a game in that 18 months?
No.
Wow.
No.
So, let's unpack that. So how tough was that 18 months?
Well, a lot of it, I remember a lot of the time I was spending doing website work to pay the bills.
Right.
So there wasn't, I remember doing a few design docs here and there, but yeah.
Yes.
So it was actually a really fun, like most of it was quite fun. It was because we were, on our own, doing our own thing, in charge of our own destiny. And, in fact, Pete and I had just actually bought a house back then together.
Back when you could do that at that age, yeah.
Yeah, about 6 months before we left. And so we obviously had no cares about the consequences. We were like, it'll work out, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
It did get tough towards the end though, obviously, when we were looking at like how long it was going to take to get this thing out. And we were just like, oh my goodness, this is so big. And we just didn't understand the idea of downscoping, about having to reduce the size of the thing we wanted to do.
I have to remember, in hindsight, looking back on it, like what on earth were we thinking? But also back then, there was only so small you could downscope. You couldn't buy an app for $1. There was a minimum charge. There was a minimum value you had to build into a game to actually have it successful, have a shot at being successful commercially.
People weren't just putting out apps left, right and centre as they are now.
Yeah. In fact, we ended up finally painfully deciding to shut up shop about a month before the iPhone came out.
Oh, really? So did you have, what were people saying to you at this time, the people who were in your life? What did they make of what you were trying to do?
Mum and Dad were okay with it as long as we were paying the bills. They're very pragmatic people, so they were, as long as we convinced them that we weren't throwing away, everything, that they weren't too concerned.
I remember hearing the word hubris a couple of times,
right?
Which now looking back on it, I can see, was
like fine. I guess you guys were right.
Yeah.
So they thought that potentially you were bitten off more than you could chew.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You needed to,
and they were totally right.
Yeah.
They were incredibly accurate with that. Yeah.
So when you look back on that, what did you learn from that period?
Yeah, I think that was a necessary thing for us to have gone through. I don't think we would be now. I don't think DPC would exist if Wandering Monster hadn't.
How come?
I think we needed to learn the lesson of scope and actually thinking through the entire plan. Not because there was a lot of hand waving when we were coming up with the business plan. We didn't have a business plan. We had a game idea. But there was still, even in that game idea and the idea of how we would actually produce it, there was a lot of like, and then we'll get some art. And, we can design this bit here and it'll be fun. And we'll do this thing here. And we eventually, what we realized, it still took 5 years to sort of internalize and process that before we got to where we were. But when we came back to it for round 2, there was like, okay, we can't hand wave.
Isn't that a very common thing among, and I use the word creative. I mean, we're all creative. And I think one of the problems with that word is our society seems to deem some people as creative and inverted commas and other people not, when the reality is we all have the capacity to express. But if you're a creative person and you are focused on your idea or the dream that you're trying to bring to life, it can be quite difficult to think about spreadsheets and numbers and strategy and being realistic. That doesn't, especially when you're young, that just doesn't come into your view of things.
And it feels like you're sort of spoiling it by bringing that into it. Like it's somehow muddying it.
And it took still years for us to ever produce a spreadsheet, but I think at least actually thinking through what you want to get done and thinking for every step or every problem you have to solve, how are you going to do that? And if you don't know, how are you going to find out how you don't know, how you will?
So having a plan.
Yeah, basically having a plan. Yeah. Thinking through everything and not allowing yourself to just feel like, yeah, I'll be fine.
So how do you what's your advice to someone listening to this about how you strike that balance between pursuing your dream and your purest artistic vision for your product and being realistic?
I think the first thing to do is to make sure you know what you want to get out of it. If it's just a hobby thing, if it's always just going to be a spare time thing and you don't want to actually spin it up into a sustaining
commercial business.
Commercial business, then do whatever you want. Who cares? It's just for you. You can do whatever you want. But if you want to be commercially sustainable, then you need to really think about it, and you can't just go in with just the idea and the expectation that it will work out. I think often we see, especially in games, I don't know if this is in other fields, but it is in games, people have this attitude of like, well, I've spent 5 years of my life on this and it's not fair that it hasn't worked. And it's like, no one owes you anything. You know, if you have spent 5 years on a thing and no one wants it, then it's no one's.
Yeah, that's not anyone else's fault.
Yeah. And so I think for games specifically, being in touch with the marketplace and really knowing what people are paying for, what people are looking for, or what you think people might be looking for, but they haven't found it yet. That's I think is the biggest point, the biggest thing that small developers like us can find is these little areas that don't exist yet, but that could.
That's an interesting point that you made around, it's almost a sense of entitlement, perhaps, that I've put in the hard yards. Why hasn't this led somewhere? Is that a common thing that you encounter?
I think it's exacerbated by the fact that, especially in games, is that we love to tell stories of this lone gun who spent years on this thing and then it just exploded overnight, but we don't tell the stories of the people that that exact same thing, but then had it not work out.
Which would be the majority of cases.
It would probably be
99.99%.
Which is a pretty
projects in that vein.
That's a brutal statistic, but is obviously a reflection of, and I think of many other industries as well, that where there is only a small number of people who will ever get to that level of having something that, for whatever reason, becomes popular, takes off, becomes a runaway hit. So you made that point around how if you want it to be a hobby, let it be a hobby, enjoy it, foster it, do whatever you want. What about the people, though, who do have the same dream that you have and are wondering, do I really take this punt? Do I invest in this? How do I know that I'm going to get a return on this, or am I going to end up in 5 or 10 years financially worse off, perhaps, and without anything to show for it?
There are many paths there. One path, I guess, is the one that we took, is start small and make sure that so I would keep it a side gig for as long as you can, because it's the least stress option is if you have a reliable income and you don't have to be concerned about that.
And I think we are in this particularly odd industry, but like I've said, I've never worked in any other industry, so I might be overemphasizing how odd ours is, but where one or two people can make a product and release it and have it be a big success. And you don't need any outside investment, which isn't to say that's the only way to make games. That is the way we made our games. And of course, we've seen that as well happen just over the last few months, where with the New York Times just bought One Man's Game for an undisclosed high sum, right?
Wordle.
So he made this game and it exploded, and you look at it now, it's like, oh yeah, of course, it's such an obvious design.
Yes.
How could it not have worked? And then how did that game go undiscovered for so long? And there's still other things like that, of course. Like, it's not like that's the only game that was the last game we had to discover.
Yeah, so the way that we did our first game, Mini Metro, is that it began where we developed it over a weekend, and then we kind of had a vibe that we could tell it was going to be a good thing.
Where did the vibe come from?
It was just I mean,
we just have a sense sometimes of like, oh, there's something here. It's worthwhile pursuing this.
Yeah, and we were always getting positive feedback, and it's not the feedback of people saying like, oh yeah, that's fun. It's people actually actively asking us. Our like friends were asking us, oh hey, have you thought about adding this? Have you thought about this? And
so just explain Mini Metro.
So Mini Metro, it's a interactive subway map. So it looks like it looks like a map of the London Underground, and you add and remove and edit lines to get everyone to get everyone to where they want to go. So it's sort of it's a very very easily approachable game because most people understand the iconography and everything like that. So
it's a transport based game.
Yeah, you are building a transport map. Yeah. And it sounds, I know it sounds quite dull, but it really tapped into this. We just found an audience all around the world who just loved the game.
So how did that take off?
Well, because so as Rob said, we made it as part of a game jam, which is in this one, it's an organised event that takes place all over the world, and everyone's got everyone who enters has a weekend to produce a game. At the end of that weekend, you upload your game,
right? And
then it encourages other developers who entered to play your game and then to discuss it. And even from that, we got really positive feedback from it. People, I remember people saying I was playing it for hours, and then I would head outside, and then I could see the game in front of me as I was, that kind of thing. And I remember at the time I had a contract that had just ended, and I went into the office on my last day, and everyone was playing the game.
Right.
Like they'd all heard from someone there that, oh, Pete's made this thing, and then just going in and they're all playing it and comparing scores and stuff. I was like, this is weird. I've never had anything like this before. So then we started work on a more fully featured version, and then we had that playable on the web in September. So that was in April of 2013, and then in September of 2013 we had a much more robust version of it up online for free.
So tell me about how successful this became. Where did this game take you?
We had to get our partners to answer emails because we just couldn't answer them all.
Right.
It was pretty full on.
We had a link. We just had a thing on the website saying, "Oh, if you've got any ideas or bug reports, email us." And I was like, well, why did they put that there? Yeah. It's like, I didn't mean it, But yeah, it was, I think, this is always hard to discuss because it sounds like it's quite hard, but success is quite tough. Like when you have a visible success, it does place a burden on you. Because also success is very, success is always visible, so you're always exposed.
Well, you got a BAFTA nomination.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that the BAFTAs extended to gaming.
There is a games BAFTA. Yeah, so when we were there, I sat next to a composer who asked if I knew Pete, as in
This is at the
as in
ceremony
Peter Jackson
in
Yeah,
London.
Yeah. And I was like, no, I don't know Pete. No, and I don't call him that. I call him Sir Jackson. But anyway, I asked him like, so what are the actual BAFTAs like? He said, oh, they're much better than this. So
is there a separate BAFTAs for gaming?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's still awesome.
Yeah.
It was still such an awesome experience. So,
Were you able to enjoy that? I mean, we talked about this journey to get there. Were you able to go, we've actually cracked it?
That year, 2016, that was a pretty special year. Yeah, that was quite spectacular. We were up for the Independent Games Festival Awards. I think that was when we got the interview on 7 Sharp as well.
Yeah.
And we when did you go to Norway for that? We got asked to speak at that conference.
That was 2016.
Yeah,
I remember because
yeah.
we got the phone call from Apple when I was in the airport.
Yeah, so that was the year things kind of got pretty serious. Yeah.
So you mentioned the burden of success. What did that mean for you in the months or years that followed?
Oof.
There's a lot of it. I think given the kind of people we are, it comes with a big sense of obligation because all of a sudden it's like, oh, we've put this thing out and it means a lot to people, or people are getting a lot out of it. So, we need to make this the best we can. And then there's a lot of people have opinions and ideas about what you should be doing, what you shouldn't be doing. And some people can shrug those off and ignore them and just do what's in their heart, and what they believe is best for their little thing. And I wish I was one of those people.
So you feel pressure to follow up on a massive success that?
Yeah, there is that. And I had forgotten actually, because when we released our the game that came after this one, which came out on Apple Arcade in 2019?
Yeah, 2019, Mini Motorways. Yeah, it was out in September 2019.
When that came out to a positive reception and people compared it favourably to the one that came before it, I had this absolute wave of relief come over me that I wasn't even prepared for. But and this is probably skipping ahead, but the development period for that was very different, but and very compressed. And we didn't get any feedback on the game before it was out. But I didn't realize quite how anxious I was about failing, about publicly failing and not succeeding and not proving that it wasn't just a one hit, that I wasn't actually a capable game developer. So there's that sort of fear of can you actually repeat this? Because we are obviously in a very hit-driven industry, and if you can only make one hit, then
well, it's like a musician trying to put out their second album, right?
Yeah.
So, what have you learned about failure and success, and how you navigate that pressure?
So failure is necessary, obviously. I mean, it's the sort of thing you hear all the time about this. And, if you're not failing half the time, then you're not trying anything interesting, all of that stuff. It still sucks, right? If you've got an idea, you get personally attached to it, you think it'll work, you try it, and for whatever reason it doesn't work, that stings. To get to the point where you can fail and just see that as an experiment, and you always get something out of that. I heard someone say recently that game development's always just one. You're always doing experiment after experiment after experiment,
right?
And
seeing what sticks.
You're seeing seeing what sticks, and it's not just every game is an experiment, but every little bit in that process is an experiment. Even picking the screenshots that you put up on the store page, that itself is a whole bunch of experiments because you've got to see how people react to it.
There are a lot of headlines around how New Zealand's game industry could be our next billion-dollar industry. Do you believe that?
Yeah, I do. I think that we have shown. I mean, if you compare our industry to Australia's. For example, I mean, they have double employees and half the revenue. Like our industry does punch very, very high above our weight. And if you compare us, there are other comparable countries like Finland, I think.
That's always the one.
I mean, obviously they have a few completely standout performers, but they have an industry that we could become. And and I think there's huge growth potential in the space.
Hey, Peter and Robert, it's been so nice to talk to you today. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you. Thank you.
Imagine This is brought to you by Wellington NZ. Check out more episodes right here or wherever good podcasts are found. See you next time.